Whilst hovering is important to master, in an attack helicopter, a stationary helicopter is a dead helicopter, and even when they're hovering, they're usually moving a little bit. You've got to be able to transition into forward flight as quickly as possible. So as we transition into forward flight, note that that percentage will reduce. And I'll also, as we just move now, and I haven't touched the collective at all. I haven't touched it. You can see that I'm just using the power of the rotors. Tiny inputs, and just like radio control helicopters in the hover, we say pat, don't push, and that's no different than than a simulated helicopter or a real helicopter. You've got to pat the controls, don't push them. If you push them, you're just going to fall out of the sky. And as we transition into this forward flight that we're doing right now, you can see now, without touching the collective, it's dropped down to 65%. The motor or the engine is requiring less power for us to be able to maintain this attitude of the aircraft. And I haven't, for our DCS pals, I haven't trimmed yet. There's no need to trim in the hover. You don't need to trim in the hover whatsoever. You should be going by number one eyeball with no trim. You need to be able to know exactly where you need to know exactly where what the helicopter is up to. And likewise, right now, I'm not even looking at that MPD down there, that MF, the display on the left-hand side. Not even looking. I'm going with my gut when it comes to flying. And that is important that you master that first before you start looking at any aids to help you, i.e. IADs or displays or whatever. You've got enough in this cockpit without any electronic aids. You've got displays down the right hand side which will tell you your altitude and your speed, and ultimately you've got your gut, you've got your number one eyeball, and it's very, very important in the hover and in flying around. You should be able to do that without any of those aids. So moving into this second phase of flying around, you'll note that the faster we go, we're going to use right rudder to counteract those forces that are being placed upon the helicopter. And if we increase our pitch, as we're doing now, we're going to have to just slacken off a little bit and just equal it off on the rudder pedals. Tiny movements. Essentially, I like to set my torque to about 80% whilst I'm transitioning in forward flight like this. Around about 80% is enough there for any stress or strain. And then what you want to do is you want to achieve your altitude that you want. So let's do that. Let's achieve the altitude. Achieve the altitude. Achieve the attitude. Achieve the attitude. I'd say roughly around about there. We've just trimmed it into position there, and I'm holding my stick with two fingers. I've got my feet off of the pedals, and we're now flying forward at its maximum speed of 111 knots at 84%. There or thereabouts. We're slightly nose up, aren't we? Let's come down. That arrow on the right hand side there, that is basically a vertical velocity indicator. Where that thick green line is, that is the horizon, and the caret on the left hand side that's going up and down will dictate whether we're above or below that. So clearly you can see we're at 500 feet and we're not gaining, and we're not gaining, and we're not climbing. There we go, forward flight. Now let's put our IADs on. So here is our IADs. This is our integrated helmet display system, and it has 4 different modes. I'm not going to go through those modes right now, but the mode that we're in right now is called a bob-up mode. That's when we're stationary, and that enables us to be able to mark a position on the ground, know our relative position to that when we bob up above a target, above a piece of cover to engage a target. Then we've got a sort of hovering mode, which we'll see in a minute, and then we've got a couple of forward flight modes. So this IADS is fantastic when it's used with the weapon systems, purely and simply because we are able to move our head, and our head is relative to our gun. And of course we can acquire targets, and we can use various sensor systems on the helicopter, all of which are modelled. In front of us you can see that thick green circle with some sticks coming out of it. You can see it, you know, what was it, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock. And that's called a path vector essentially. That is saying, look, wherever I am on your view, that is where you are going to end up. And so what a lot of people do is they try and match that. They say, oh right, okay, I need to level onto it. I need to, oh no, what's happening? I need to make sure it's in front of me. Oh no, that's not where I want to go. And they will consistently end up chasing it. And this is because this is not war. Was it Warbirds? This is a simulation. And so that path vector is relative to the attitude of the aircraft. So for example, there are two different ways in which the attitude of the aircraft is in the air. There is aerodynamic trim and there is nose to tail trim. Now right now we are in nose to tail trim. In other words, the helicopter is going where I'm pointing it, and I'm going with my gut. But look what's happening to that path vector. It will consistently move, and the higher the altitude we are, the higher, the more that will move, certainly when we're looking at the ground. But if we was to go in aerodynamic trim, and I've just done it now, you can see that ball in the bottom there in between the two bars, that represents the attitude of the aircraft. And right now we're in aerodynamic trim, and so aerodynamically, with the forces that this thing is putting on the world, we are aerodynamically trimmed. And for longer journeys, etc., it is always wise to be aerodynamically trimmed, purely and simply because you're going to use less fuel for a start, you're going to have longer hang time when you get there, and ultimately it's a lot easier for the motor and for the engines and so on. And that path vector, providing you're aerodynamically trimmed, that path vector is going to be a lot more accurate. In other words, where you're going to end up. But you know, as you can see, that path vector isn't moving right now, and that's where we're going to end up. It's not going to take into account what's in front. That's down to you. So when you're flying the helicopter, you need to fly it. You need to go with your number one eyeball. You need to be able to fly it and achieve what you need to achieve by your gut, not by the path vector. Don't get fooled into playing the mini game of the path vector. I've just released the trim there purely and simply because I'm conscious that we're coming we're way out, aren't we? There's the airfield up there. And you'll note there, as I banked, there was a lot of torque placed on the motor, and yet I haven't touched the collective. And that's, of course, you know, as we're banking, you know, those blades are required to work specifically harder, and therefore the motor, or the torque on the motor on the engines, again, is significantly more. So yeah. So look, that's my tip to DCS world pilots. You know, don't worry about where the bloody path vector is. Fly it. You know, and if you're on a mission on a server where you're, you know, spending half an hour to transit to somewhere, well, you should be right down hugging the earth anyway. You know, as an active operational theatre, so to speak. So yeah. Right, what about transitioning to a hover? Now earlier on I said that there are 4 modes. Let's put this mode on, and as we transition, as we lower the collective, note, as we've lowered the collective now, the helicopter will automatically pitch up, and we are going to have to play now the games with the rudder pedals to equal those out, and at the same time we are going to have to make sure that our forward speed is in parity with our reduction in altitude based upon the weight of our helicopter. If we don't ensure that is right, then we will fall into something called a vortex ring state and suck to the ground.
But no one can deny the great show they put on. Here's an Augusta scale model. The Germans love their scale models, and this is going to go into a vortex ring state where its forward momentum is not in parity with its descend rate, and that's what happens.
Now that there are parameters for that, but as I said, this is not a tutorial. The key thing is that you should be able to do this. You should be able to transition into a hover. But as I said to my DCS, as I said earlier, and particularly to the DCS world community, do not fall into the trap of the mini game, which we are going to play right now. The mini game. Let's try and keep that circle in the centre. And people try the mini game, don't they? Is it that one? Is that one? There's that one, isn't it? There it is. Okay, so we're still 5 mile an hour forward, 43 knots. Here comes the circle. Here comes the mini game. Oh, it is the worst thing in the world. You know, you should be able to transition to a hover exactly as we took off and as we gave a demonstration earlier, without the need for any visual aids. It is there as an aid and nothing more. So don't, give yourself a break. Don't try and get it central, etc. There's no need for any trim. You need to make sure that if you're transitioning into a hover, that as you reduce your altitude, that you release the trim when the helicopter is going at a fairly slow sort of speed, or trim on the way down so that there's less of an impact when you do actually transition to a hover. Right, that's enough of that. Let's now crack on.